In a small Texas ranch town where everybody knew everybody's business, Sarah had spent 3 years watching the quiet cowboy who worked the neighboring property. She never thought he noticed her, standing at the fence line watching sunsets. But what happened the night she finally found the courage to tell him the truth changed everything, not because he rejected her, but because he admitted something that made her heart stop. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't written in fairy tales. Sometimes they're written in the dust of a ranch, under stars that have witnessed 1,000 silent hopes, finally, spoken out loud. Part 1, Waiting in Silence. Sarah Mitchell had never been the type to believe in destiny or fate. At 32 years old, she had learned that life was mostly about showing up, doing your work, and accepting what came your way. But, somewhere in the last 3 years, living on her inherited ranch just outside of Bluebell, Texas, she had started to believe in one small thing: coincidence. The kind of coincidence that made Marcus Kane, the tall, quiet cowboy who managed the ranch next door, appear at exactly the places where she happened to be. It started as something small. She would be at the hardware store in town, and there he would be, buying nails or rope. She would be riding her horse along the eastern fence line, and she would see him on his side, doing the same thing. She would sit on her porch drinking coffee at dawn, and his truck would drive past on the ranch road, never stopping but always there. These moments had become the structure of her days, the invisible thread that pulled her forward through the monotony of ranch life. Sarah had inherited the 200-acre Miller Ranch from her uncle when she was 29. She had left behind a desk job in Austin, a failed engagement to a man named David who wanted her to be something she wasn't, and a life that had started to feel like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. The ranch needed her, or at least that's what she told herself. Her uncle's health had been declining for years, and, when he passed, it felt natural to come home. Bluebell was home. It always had been. The problem was that Sarah had never been a real rancher. She had grown up in town, in a house with her parents who worked regular jobs. Yes, she had spent summers with her uncle, and, yes, she loved horses and the land, but there was a difference between loving something and knowing how to manage it professionally. The first year had been brutal. She made mistakes that cost her money. She didn't know which herd to sell or when to sell them. She hired hands who didn't work out. She cried in the barn more times than she could count. That was the year Marcus showed up. Not to her ranch, but to the one next door. The Whitmore Ranch had been in decline for a decade, and when new ownership came in and hired Marcus as the primary manager, everything changed. The fences were rebuilt. The cattle were rotated properly. The land was managed with a respect that Sarah could feel even from a distance. Marcus came from somewhere up north. He didn't talk about his past much, and Bluebell wasn't the kind of place where you pushed people to share what they weren't volunteering. But Sarah had gathered pieces. He had worked in Montana and Wyoming. He had done something that required skill and patience. He was in his mid-30s, with weathered hands and eyes that seemed to have seen both good and hard things. She first properly noticed him at the ranch supply store on a Saturday morning. She had been standing in front of bags of grain, trying to remember what her ranch hand, Tom, had told her to buy, when a voice beside her said, "You're going to want the one with the higher protein content if your herd is looking lean." She turned to see a man with a dust-covered cowboy hat and a calm expression. "How did you know?" she had asked. "You're Sarah Mitchell," he said. "I manage the Whitmore place next to yours. I've seen your cattle from our property line. They've looked underfed the past month." That simple observation had been the beginning. Sarah had felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment that someone had noticed her struggles, but she had also felt something else: relief. Relief that someone who knew what they were doing was close enough to see what was happening and care enough to help. Over the following months, Marcus had become a kind of guardian angel in a cowboy hat. Not in a way that felt like charity, but in subtle ways. Tom, her ranch hand, suddenly seemed to know better what to do. When Sarah asked Tom about it, he admitted that Marcus had stopped by and given him some advice about feed and water schedules. When a fence on the eastern border came down in a storm, Marcus appeared with his own tools and helped fix it, refusing payment but accepting a thermos of coffee. When Sarah's mare was pregnant and struggling, it was Marcus who came in the middle of the night because Tom had called him, and it was Marcus who delivered the foal safely and stayed until he was sure both mother and baby were healthy. Sarah had never asked him directly what he was doing there, in her life, helping her solve problems he didn't have to solve. Some part of her already knew the answer, and she was terrified of what that answer meant. Because Marcus never looked at her like the other men in town did. He didn't smile and flirt and try to impress her at community events. He looked at her like she was competent, like she was someone who could handle herself, like he respected her. And that kind of look, coming from a man who made her heart move in her chest every time she saw him, was far more dangerous than any smooth line could have been. By the third year, Sarah had stopped trying to deny what she felt. She was in love with Marcus Kane. It was a love that had grown quietly, like a plant in shade, strong despite the darkness. She loved the way he moved, with purpose and grace. She loved that he was quiet, and, in his quiet, he seemed to understand things that loud people missed. She loved that he treated animals the way some people treated children. She loved that he was humble despite his competence. But she had also spent 3 years convincing herself that he didn't feel the same way. Why would he? She was his neighbor. She was grateful to him, and maybe he felt obligated. She was a woman who had moved to the ranch to run away from her old life, and he was a man who clearly had his own story, his own reasons for being here. They existed in proximity, but not in the same world. Sarah had made friends in town. Maggie worked at the feed store, and she had become like a sister. Maggie knew about Marcus because Maggie knew everything that happened in Bluebell. One afternoon, sitting on the porch of Sarah's ranch house with sweet tea sweating in their glasses, Maggie had asked the question Sarah had been avoiding. "Are you ever going to tell him?" Maggie had said it casually, but her eyes were serious. "Tell him what?" Sarah had played dumb, but they both knew she wasn't. "That you're completely in love with him. That you've been in love with him since the day he fixed your fence in that thunderstorm and you made him dinner and couldn't stop looking at his hands while he ate." Sarah had laughed because she didn't know what else to do. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sarah." Maggie had put down her tea glass. "Life is short. I watched my mother wait for my father to speak first, and they wasted 10 years being miserable when they could have been happy. Don't do that. Don't wait. Life doesn't give you infinite chances." That conversation had haunted Sarah for months. She had thought about it in the morning when she saw his truck pass by. She had thought about it in the evening when she stood on her porch and looked toward his land. She had thought about it when he came to help her with the spring branding, working alongside her for 12 hours straight, their shoulders almost touching as they guided cattle through the chute. The thing about being in love with someone who lived next door was that you couldn't avoid them. You also couldn't explain the feeling away. Sarah had tried. She had told herself that what she felt was gratitude, or admiration, or loneliness finding an outlet. But she knew the truth. It was love. It was real and complicated and terrifying. And it was the kind of love that required a choice. She could either spend the rest of her life in this quiet torture, this waiting and watching and pretending, or she could risk everything and tell him the truth. One option meant safety. The other meant possible devastation. As fall came to Texas, Sarah made a decision. She had spent 3 years gathering the courage to tell him. She had spent 3 years building a life that felt like it might be worth living, even if he said no. She had become a better rancher. She had made friends. She had healed from her past and learned who she was when she wasn't trying to be someone else. And if she did nothing, all of that would feel like it was in preparation for a life that was only half-lived. The decision came to her one evening when she was standing at the fence line, watching the sun drop below the horizon, turning the sky into shades of amber and rose and deep purple. She heard the sound of a truck approaching on the ranch road, and, when she turned, she knew it was him. She always knew. Her body knew his presence the way a compass knows north. Marcus pulled up beside the fence and stepped out. He was wearing his work clothes, covered in dust from the day, his hat marked with a dark line where his head had sweated. He looked tired and solid and real. "Your north pasture fence is looking good," he said, which was his way of saying hello. "I fixed it last week," Sarah said. "I'm getting better at this." "You always were good at this," Marcus said. "You were just learning." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence they were comfortable with after 3 years. "I was thinking," Sarah said, "maybe next weekend, you could come over for dinner. Not just because you helped me. Because I want to spend time with you. Just you and me." She said it before she could think too much about it, before her fear could talk her into staying quiet. Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought she might have to take it back, pretend she had meant something else. "Then," he said, "I've been waiting for you to ask me." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. "What?" "I've been waiting," Marcus repeated. "For 3 years, I've been waiting for you to be ready to ask me. Because I couldn't ask you first. It wouldn't have been right." "Why not?" Sarah's voice was small. "Because you needed to stand on your own first. You needed to learn this ranch, build this life, become who you are now. I could see you doing it, Sarah. Every day, I could see you getting stronger. I wasn't going to mess with that. So I waited." Sarah realized she was holding her breath. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll be at your ranch next Saturday at 6 o'clock, Marcus said. "And I've been thinking about this moment for so long that I'm probably going to be nervous the entire time." For the first time, Sarah saw Marcus Kane look something other than calm and certain. She saw vulnerability in his face, and, somehow that made everything feel real in a way she hadn't expected. Part 2, The Confession Beneath the Stars. Sarah spent the week before Saturday in a state of controlled panic. She cleaned the house, which was ridiculous because Marcus had been to her house dozens of times, but this time felt different. She cleaned it anyway, scrubbing the kitchen until her arms ached, washing windows, arranging flowers in a vase on the dining table. Then, she second-guessed the flowers. Too obvious? Too romantic? She left them in anyway. The menu consumed her thoughts. She wanted to cook something special, but not something that would take all evening to prepare, because she wanted to actually spend time with him, not be trapped in the kitchen. She settled on the things she knew how to make well: roasted chicken with garlic and herbs, potatoes, a salad from the vegetables she had grown in her small garden. For dessert, apple pie, which was her specialty, the recipe passed down from her grandmother. Her neighbor Maggie came over on Friday to help her prepare and, more importantly, to ensure that Sarah didn't talk herself out of everything. "You're not allowed to cancel," Maggie said, sitting at Sarah's kitchen table while Sarah arranged the table settings. "I don't care if a tornado hits, you're having this dinner." "What if he doesn't feel the way I think he does?" Sarah asked for the 5th time. "Then, you'll know, and you can move forward knowing that. Right now, you're just guessing. You're living in a story you're writing in your head. Tomorrow night, you get to live in reality instead." "Reality is scarier," Sarah said. "Reality is always scarier," Maggie agreed. "But it's also better because it's real." Saturday arrived with impossible slowness. Sarah found herself watching the clock from the moment she woke up. She tried to keep busy. She rode her horse along the fence line where Marcus usually worked, but he wasn't there. She checked and rechecked the food she had already prepared. She showered and changed clothes 3 times, finally, settling on simple jeans and a soft blue button-down that she had owned for years. At 5:45, she poured 2 glasses of wine and set them on the porch table. At 5:58, she heard the sound of his truck approaching. Her heart moved into her throat. She had expected to feel nervous, but what she actually felt was a kind of clarity. Whatever happened in the next few hours, at least she would know. At least she wouldn't spend the rest of her life wondering. Marcus appeared at her door exactly at 6, and Sarah realized that he had changed clothes too. He was wearing a clean button-down shirt, darker than hers, and clean jeans, and his boots were polished. His hair was still damp from a shower. He had made an effort, and that meant something. "Come in," Sarah said, and she was proud that her voice sounded normal. Dinner went better than Sarah had feared. They talked about the ranch, but not in the way they usually talked about it, with Marcus offering advice and Sarah taking notes. This time, they talked about their visions for the land. Marcus told her about a section of his property that he was thinking about converting to native grassland, and Sarah listened with the intensity of someone who was learning as much about the man as she was about the ideas. By the time they finished eating, the sun had dropped below the horizon, and the sky had turned into shades of deep blue and purple. Marcus offered to help clean up, but Sarah waved him away. "Let's go sit outside," she said. "I want to show you something." She led him to the south pasture, where she had discovered a small rise in the land that gave a view of almost the entire ranch in one direction and the Whitmore property in the other. They walked there in silence, and Sarah was aware of every moment, every breath, every way that her body was humming with anticipation. At the top of the rise, the stars were just starting to appear. They sat in the grass, their shoulders almost touching. Sarah could hear the sound of cattle in the distance, the normal night sounds of the ranch. She could smell Marcus, which had become her favorite smell, hay and leather and something that was just him. "I've been coming up here since I moved to the ranch," Sarah said. "In the beginning, I came because I was lonely and didn't know what else to do. Then, I came because I liked it. And then, I started coming because I would see your truck sometimes, across the fence, and it made me feel less lonely." Marcus turned to look at her, and, in the dim light, she could see his face clearly. "Sarah, let me finish," she said. "I've been thinking about what I want to say all week, and if I don't do this now, I'll lose my courage. So please, just let me finish." He nodded. "I'm in love with you," Sarah said, and the words fell out into the night like they had been waiting all along to be spoken. "I have been for a long time. And I know that maybe you don't feel the same way, or maybe what you said at the fence was just kindness, but I needed you to know. I needed to stop living in my own head and just tell you the truth. Because I realized that waiting was a kind of lie too. It was me pretending that I wasn't sure, that I wasn't ready, when really, I was just scared." Sarah had expected many things in response. She had expected him to be kind but to let her down gently. She had expected him to say that he cared about her but that maybe they should just be friends. She had even prepared herself for rejection, for the possibility that she had read everything wrong. What she had not expected was for Marcus to move closer to her, to take her face in his hands with a tenderness that made her breath catch, and to say, "I love you too. I have loved you since the day Tom told me you had been standing in the rain, trying to find a calf that had gotten lost. I've loved you through every day since." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like Sarah had imagined it would be. It wasn't grand or theatrical. It was quiet and sure, like everything else about him. It tasted like certainty and possibility. It tasted like coming home after a long journey. When they broke apart, Sarah was crying, though she hadn't noticed the tears starting. Marcus brushed them away with his thumbs. "I was terrified," he said. "That you didn't feel the same way. That you would always see me as the neighbor who helped out. That I had waited too long. Why didn't you just tell me?" Sarah asked. "Because you needed to believe in yourself first," Marcus said. "I could see how hard you were working to build this life. I could see the doubt you carried. And I knew that if I had told you I loved you before you knew you were capable, you might have confused my love with the reason you stayed. I needed you to choose to stay because you wanted this, the ranch, the life, yourself. And then, I needed you to choose me because you wanted to, not because you were grateful." Sarah understood then what those 3 years had been. They hadn't been a waste. They had been exactly what both of them had needed. She had learned to stand on her own, and he had learned to be patient. And now, they could build something real, something that was chosen by both of them, fully and completely. They sat together under the stars, and Marcus told her about his past. He had been married once, to a woman he had thought was his forever, until she had decided that forever was too long for her. The marriage had ended, and he had spent years moving from job to job, from place to place, trying to outrun the feeling that maybe he wasn't meant to have a partner. Then, he had come to Bluebell, and he had seen Sarah, and he had known that everything had changed. "I didn't believe in second chances," Marcus said. "Not until I met you. I was running away too," Sarah admitted. "From a life that didn't fit. from a person who wanted me to be something I wasn't. I thought moving to the ranch meant I was running toward something, but really, I was just running away. And now? Marcus asked. Now I'm staying because I want to be here, Sarah said. And I want to be here with you. They stayed on the rise until the stars came out fully, until the night was deep and complete. When they finally walked back to the house, Marcus held her hand, and Sarah felt like she was floating. She had spent 3 years believing that this moment would never come. And now it was here, and it was real, and it was hers. Part 3, Building a Life Together. The morning after, Sarah woke to the sound of rain on her roof, and, for a moment, she wondered if the entire night had been a dream. Then, she rolled over and saw the indent of another head on the second pillow, and she knew it was real. Marcus had stayed. They had talked until 2 in the morning, sitting on the porch, and then they had fallen asleep like two people who had been waiting for permission to rest. He was in the kitchen when she emerged, barefoot and barely awake. He had made coffee and was standing at the window, looking out at her ranch with an expression that Sarah had never seen on his face before. It was peace. "Good morning," he said, turning to her with a smile that transformed his entire face. "I wasn't sure if you would still be here," Sarah said. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said. "Not unless you want me to." Sarah didn't want him to. Over the next months, they settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment since the beginning of time. Marcus began to spend more time at Sarah's ranch. He didn't move informally, but his things appeared gradually. A jacket in her closet. His coffee mug in the cabinet. A toothbrush in her bathroom. The community in Bluebell took the news of their relationship with something that surprised Sarah, complete on surprises. Maggie just laughed when Sarah finally told her. "Honey, everyone has known you two were together for about 2.5 years, Maggie said. We've all just been waiting for you two to catch up." The seasons changed. Winter came with its challenges, and spring came with new beginnings. Sarah found herself waking early to ride with Marcus, to learn from him not through his advice but through his example. She saw the way he treated animals, with respect and patience. She saw the way he managed the land, understanding it not as something to be conquered but as something to be worked with, to be in partnership with. One afternoon, almost a year after their first dinner, Marcus came to Sarah with a question that changed everything again. "I want to talk to you about combining the properties," he said. They were sitting in her barn, mending a section of fence that had come down. "Not right away, but eventually. I've been thinking about what we could build if we managed the land as one operation instead of two separate ones." Sarah had thought about this too, though she hadn't let herself imagine it too seriously. "That's a big decision." "It is," Marcus said. "Which is why I want to talk about something else first. Something that might be the most important decision we ever make." He knelt down, right there in the barn, surrounded by hay and leather and the smell of the animals they both loved. He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know this is fast," Marcus said. "I know that some people think you need to wait years. But I've already waited 3 years. I've watched you become the strongest, most capable person I've ever known. I've watched you heal and build and believe in yourself. And I want to spend the rest of my life doing exactly this, watching you, working beside you, loving you. Will you marry me?" Sarah said yes before he had even gotten the ring fully out of the box. She said yes and kissed him and held him, and somewhere in the middle of it, she cried happy tears for the first time in her adult life. The wedding was small, held in the garden at Sarah's ranch in early spring. Maggie was her maid of honor. Marcus's brother came from Montana, a younger version of Marcus with softer eyes and a quicker smile. The pastor from town married them. When they kissed as husband and wife, someone in the small gathered crowd cheered, and then everyone was cheering. After the wedding, life settled into a new kind of rhythm. Sarah and Marcus began the slow process of combining the two properties. It was a practical process, merging cattle herds, reconfiguring land usage, selling some equipment and keeping other pieces. But it was also deeply personal, an acknowledgement that they had chosen to build their futures together, to commit to the same goals and dreams. Sarah discovered that she liked having a partner in the way she had never thought she would. Not because she needed rescuing, she could rescue herself now. But because having Marcus meant that her joys were bigger, her problems were smaller, and her life had found its center. She had spent so much time being strong alone that she had forgotten what it felt like to be strong with someone. 2 years into their marriage, Sarah was pregnant with their first child, a daughter they named Elena. The night Elena was born, Marcus held her in the hospital room and cried. Sarah, exhausted and exhilarated, watched him with their daughter and understood something that she had only intellectually known before: love wasn't just a feeling. It was a choice you made every day. It was the choice to show up, to be present, to build something with someone even when it was difficult. Elena grew up knowing both the ranch and the love of both her parents. She learned to ride before she could walk well, helped by Marcus on a gentle horse he had chosen specifically for the purpose. She learned to manage the land from both of them, understanding both the technical knowledge and the wisdom about working with nature rather than against it. By the time Elena was 5 years old, Sarah and Marcus had expanded the operation significantly. They had hired more help, moved away from a struggling cattle operation towards something more sustainable. They had added a small tourism component to the ranch, offering riding lessons and overnight stays for people who wanted to experience ranch life. Sarah found that she enjoyed teaching, enjoyed helping other people discover what she had discovered, that there was peace in honest work and connection to land and animals. One evening, years after their wedding, Sarah stood on the same rise where she had confessed her love. This time, Marcus was beside her, and Elena was in Marcus's arms, watching the sun set. Cattle moved in the pastures below, a mix of both their herds, no longer divided by the fence. The land stretched out, peaceful and productive, the result of years of careful work. "Do you remember when you told me you were in love with me?" Marcus asked, adjusting his hold on Elena so she could see better. "Every day," Sarah said. "I was terrified," Marcus said. "That I had read everything wrong. That I had waited too long. That you would realize I wasn't worth all this." Sarah took his free hand. "I was the one who was terrified. But, you know what I learned? The only thing worth being afraid of is never taking the chance at all." Elena pointed at a bird flying across the sky, and both her parents laughed. She was learning language rapidly, combining words in ways that were almost sentences, almost meaning. She would grow up and make her own choices, her own mistakes, her own triumphs. What Sarah and Marcus had given her was something different: the knowledge that love was real, that commitment meant something, that building a life with someone was possible and beautiful and worth every moment of the courage it required. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed Sarah's confession 3 years before, the same stars that had seen countless moments of connection and understanding. Sarah thought about the woman she had been when she arrived at the ranch, running and lost and trying to find her footing. She thought about the journey from that woman to this one, rooted, loved, complete. She had expected rejection when she confessed her love. Instead, she had found acceptance and partnership and a future that was better than anything she could have imagined. The greatest gift wasn't that Marcus had loved her back. It was that he had waited long enough for her to love herself first. And, in that waiting, in that patience, in that deep understanding of what she needed, he had shown her what real love actually was. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about showing up, day after day. It was about building something real, something that lasted, something that was chosen freely and fully. It was about 3 years of quiet moments at a fence line. It was about a cowboy who had the wisdom to wait. It was about a woman who finally found the courage to speak. And it was about a life that, once begun in honesty and vulnerability, only grew more beautiful with each passing season.